You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
It is Sons of the Shoe, Spencer German with you, the obnoxious, I shouldn't say obnoxious, it's a good intro, but it is always way too loud when we start this show. I can barely hear myself think, but here we are. It's Spencer German, no Nick Wilson, because naturally, whenever we try to plan these things out and work around our schedules, something terrible happens, and he's dealing with a car situation. So here we are. I do have a guest, though, lined up for us, and it's a guest that you guys should know, because when I had him on previously, before the season started, I told him we were going to book him again in the lead up to what is the biggest game of the season to this point for the Buckeyes, as we know. Could end up being the biggest game. Well, I shouldn't say that, because as Ohio State fans, I know Michigan will always be the biggest game. But to this point, definitely the biggest game, one of the biggest games in the entire schedule. And I'm pleased to have back to the show for Alec, you are our first double guest, first person we've had on twice on this podcast. So I'm pleased to bring back Alec Dietz, who covers Oregon beat reporter for the Eugene Register Guard. Does a tremendous job of doing so, and we appreciated his analysis leading up to the season. So we're bringing him back now to break down this game, get into the X's and O's of it all, and give us a good preview. Alec, how have you been, my friend? Nice to see you again.
Very, very good. Very good. Very busy. This week has just stepped it up for everybody. So I think everyone's kind of been looking forward to this week. We finally get to talk about the game rather than it being sort of something off in the future. It's Saturday. So excited to get to it.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of treated the first couple games of the schedule for Ohio State as like, I don't know if maybe we have called them tune-ups to Oregon, if we're being honest, but it has kind of felt like each step of the way we're trying to find like different things that signs of growth, if you will, from Ohio State and sort of setting the stage for what this game's going to look like, because we know that Oregon, like Ohio State, has a chance to be a juggernaut, really good team, and it's going to be your biggest challenge. I guess first and foremost, from the Oregon side of things, as you get ready for this matchup, what is the thing that worries you most about this team facing Ohio State?
Gosh, I think if I'm Oregon, what worries me the most is 3 red zone interceptions by Dylan Gabriel in the last 2 weeks. You cannot make those mistakes in a game like this. It's mistakes that he has not made throughout his entire career. I think the number was he had 3 in his entire career before the last 2 weeks, 3 red zone interceptions. And he's obviously had 3 in the last 2 weeks, and you can get away with that against Michigan State and UCLA. But absolutely, Oregon loses this game if he, throws a couple more red zone interceptions. So I think that's probably at the forefront of Oregon's mind. I know they've probably done a couple more red zone reps this week than maybe typically.
They obviously survived earlier in the season, that scare against Boise State. When they came out of that game, what do you think they learned about themselves? Because I always do think we like to use every game as like a measuring stick for where a team is at or how good they are or whatever. But I also think that opening stretch of the schedule where you're playing sometimes inferior opponents, I do think it sometimes presents to teams like Ohio State, teams like Oregon, a chance to learn something and grow. So as they kind of came out of that game, which was their closest game this season, the one that kind of stands out is they almost got upset a little bit. What do you think they learned from that effort?
I think that it's interesting because I think that looking back at that, maybe that wasn't as surprising of a result as it was at the time, just given what Ashton Jeanty has done to pretty much everybody on the schedule this season. But I think that really they hammered out the issues they had along their offensive line. I think Dylan Gabriel was sacked 4 times in that game, I want to say, which is the most in Dan Lanning's 3 years at Oregon. Bo Nix never got sacked 4 times. I think he got sacked. I don't remember the exact number. It might have been 5 times in his 2 years there. So to have that, have that happen in that game, they had some issues in the interior of that offensive line, and they've made a couple changes, and so far, he's barely been touched in each of the past 3 wins, and they've dominated against Oregon State, UCLA, and Michigan State. So really ironing out the kinks in the offensive line, and everyone, I think, just getting a little bit more comfortable. You can see I talked about the Dylan Gabriel's interceptions, but outside of a couple bad plays, everyone is a lot more comfortable than they were in those first few games. They had a lot of new pieces. I mean, these are all household names. Everyone knew who Dylan Gabriel was coming into the season. Evan Stewart, all these guys working together, but they hadn't played together, right, until that Idaho opener and that second Boise State game. So I think they just needed the time to gel, and it certainly looked a lot better over the last 4-ish weeks, since those first two games.
I obviously want to get to Dylan Gabriel because he's going to be a big topic of conversation, but you brought up the sacks in that game, and I know early on the offensive line was an issue, which is funny because we talk about with Ohio State, one of our biggest concerns with the Ohio State team right now is their offensive line. But if I recall, Dan Lanning made some changes up front to the offensive line. What were those changes, and what have the results been in terms of getting that group playing a little bit better since he tweaked some things?
Yeah, they were expecting Matthew Bedford, who was a transfer from Indiana, to be a contributor at guard this year, and he suffered an injury about 2 weeks away from their season opener, and it really threw him through a loop. They were planning on playing a certain guy at center, and because of that, they shifted him over to guard, and they were starting a walk-on at center, Charlie Pickard, against Idaho, and they kept with that same unit throughout that entire game, ran into trouble. And then against Boise State, they rotated the entire interior of their line. I think the number was 11 times over the course of that game, which is a lot, right, to make that many changes in one game against Boise State. But since that game, they've kept it consistently with one group. They've had Marcus Harper, who's a 5th or 6th year player playing at guard. Obviously, a Johnny Cornelius and Josh Carnley at tackles. They've been kind of the bookends, and Nashad Strother, who was a transfer from over on the East Coast, I believe East Carolina, from last year. A really experienced 6-year player playing at guard. So they've stuck with that group for the majority, or for the entirety of the last 3 games. And obviously, Dylan Gabriel has kept his jersey clean, when he hasn't scrambled, and it's been very successful since. But obviously, totally different challenge this week against an Ohio State defensive line that features, all of them are probably pros. All of them are going to probably be high draft picks and are pretty good. So it'll be interesting to see how that line that went through a lot of a tumultuous first 2 weeks and has now settled down, but obviously a stiff test when you're across the field this week.
Yeah, no doubt. And we can talk some more about that here in a little bit. But on the topic of Dylan Gabriel, what have the early returns been? Because, guy who transfers in, we're sort of experiencing the same thing here with Ohio State, right? Like transfer quarterback, high expectations, obviously, got to get acclimated quickly, got to pick things up quickly, get close and have that chemistry with their teammates. You mentioned the red zone interceptions being an issue the last couple of weeks. But what have the early returns been in terms of his play on the field and what he's brought to this Oregon Ducks team?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, he brought stability, experience, which I think is why the red zone turnovers have sort of been an anomaly and frustrating, because it's not something that a 6th-year quarterback, those mistakes shouldn't be happening, right? It's not his first go around. He's probably going to break Bo Nix's record for most starts ever that Bo Nix set last season. But outside of a few plays, he's been steady. He leads college football in completion percentage. Already thrown for over 1,000 yards. Thrown for some touchdowns. Obviously experienced in the huddle. Has been through the transfer process before. So really a stabilizing force and a guy that is experienced, if anything else. He's played in these games before. You look back at the Red River showdown last year when he led Oklahoma to that win against Texas. He's been in these moments before, and I know they have high expectations for him, which is why, again, those turnovers have been sort of an anomaly, and I think they hope that those are get him out of the way against Michigan State and UCLA before this game.
How important is it that not only he has success throwing the football, but that he gets things going with his legs and that Oregon uses him that way, especially against, like you mentioned, an Ohio State defensive line that is super aggressive, very athletic, talented guys up front. Just how much of that element of his game is do you think is going to matter in this matchup on Saturday?
Yeah, I think they've, in the opening few weeks, didn't really have him use his legs. Certainly nothing by design, but he was pretty content with staying in the pocket and getting rid of the ball fast and making those high percentage completions and letting his receivers work. I don't anticipate it being all that much different. They still want to stretch the field and dish it out to as many guys as possible and let them do work. But I do imagine, in the recent weeks, they've let him run around with his legs. They've called quarterback keepers, read options to keep defenses honest, and his legs are definitely a weapon. I think he had 16 rushing touchdowns for Oklahoma last season as a quarterback, and certainly I think that was a bigger part of his game and their scheme at Oklahoma last year than it was at Oregon. But they know that he has the ability to beat teams with his legs. And certainly I think the playbook will be wide open this week. I don't think there'll be anything held back to not show anything or, and all that. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how much they open it up and how much he's given free rein to run.
I was going to ask that next. Do you think there's been from Dan Lanning some reserving some things for this game and not giving too much away so far this season because they knew this one was coming?
Yeah, I mean, you never know for sure, but it definitely you got the feeling when you watch them against some teams that they kept it pretty vanilla because they knew they could beat teams playing vanilla. I'm sure Ohio State's been similar in a lot of their game plan. You can beat teams by throwing slants and drag routes and running pretty standard run plays. So it'll be interesting to see what they dial up. I imagine both teams have some tricks up their sleeve and. And Will Howard is a similar quarterback, right? A guy that can use his legs and, probably hasn't used his legs as much as he can. And certainly will be, I'm sure will be given free rein to do that this week if that's to their advantage.
I think that Dan Lanning is one of the best up and coming coaches in this sport. If we can still say that about him in a way. But I do think his biggest games were against Washington these last couple of years, and he's lost those. How much does this game mean in terms of Dan Lanning kind of taking that next step where he is held in higher esteem with some of these other great coaches around college football?
Yeah, I think that he's not really thinking about any of that stuff, right? He's, sometimes it's coach speak to say, we want to be 1-0 this week. We're focusing on the next opponent, but I truly think he really does mean that. Obviously is very excited about this weekend. I think that he is excited about the opportunity that this is for Oregon. Game day is coming here and, it's not like Oregon's some emerging program, but they're a national brand. And this is the first top 5 matchup ever played at Autzen Stadium. And it's a big deal. This is their entry into the Big Ten into proving that they're not, just a new kid on the block, that they can come and win this conference in year one and beat the, one of the powerhouses of the Big Ten in year one. So, I think from an outside perspective, just from us, it's a fascinating game, right? Dan Lanning certainly has the rap that he can't win that game that matters. Last season went to Seattle and lost on a missed field goal, was able to battle their way back to playoff contention, facing Washington again and again, couldn't get it done. And the same could kind of be said of Ryan Day in recent years, right? I know Michigan has been an elusive. Hello?
I got you. I don't know what happened.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. It's been an elusive win for them, and I think that it'll be interesting to see. Someone has to win this game, right? So it's fascinating from just two coaches that are that have been near the top but want to get to that next level and compete for a national championship.
Yeah, no, I think there's some parallels there for sure. Ryan Day's done it maybe on a little bit of a bigger stage, but the big thing with him, you got to what I wanted because you kind of gave me the Dan Lanning answer at first. Where it was like, he's not focused on that, but you did kind of get to the point that there is some talk among you guys, either in the media or fans of hey, he's got to win that big game. That's been the thing that's kind of eluded him. And Ryan Day obviously has a lot of that as well, given how the last couple of years have gone against Michigan. You mentioned before the season started that this Oregon defensive line is not something to sleep on. Do you think that's an area that maybe they have an advantage, is that defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line that I think has been better this year than last year, but still is probably the biggest area of concern that we have with this Ohio State team?
Yeah, I think that the defense as a whole has been playing lights out for Oregon. They have been more consistent than Oregon's offense throughout the entirety of the season. They certainly ran into trouble against Ashton Jeanty, but like I said before, who hasn't? So that has been a strength. The emergence of Jordan Birch, who was a consensus top 10-5 recruit when he came out of high school, went to South Carolina, and has only been now sort of reaching that full potential that everyone sort of knew he had as a game wrecker and a 6'6", 280-pound monster. Derek Harmon, who Ohio State's very familiar with, he was at Michigan State last season. And, you throw in Jamari Caldwell, who transferred from Houston and has been doing all the dirty work along the defensive line. So they've been a really strong unit. And they've also been able to get pressure with blitzes, whether it's Jeff Bassa at linebacker or Bryce Betcher, who's a two-sport athlete. He also plays baseball for Oregon. Or from the safeties and defensive backs as well. So they've been very strong, but on that same token, I think that they haven't been tested by a truly elite offense yet. I think that, again, outside of Jeanty at Boise State and just what he's been able to do by himself, certainly Idaho isn't going to impress everybody with their offense. Oregon State isn't ranking near the top in many offensive categories, and the same goes for UCLA and Michigan State. So totally different challenge this week to face this receiver room, and certainly two of the better running backs in the country as well. So it's going to be fascinating to see if all that early season momentum can carry over into Eugene this week.
Have you ever seen anything like Jeremiah Smith before?
Oh man, he's something else. I think for his age, him and Ryan Williams out of Bama, it's certainly both those guys as 18 or 17 or however old they are. It's impressive. It's just I've only been able to watch some of the highlights, and there are a lot of them, so it is, I guess, quite a lot of plays. But certainly excited to see him in person. I think that'll be a completely different experience, and obviously a challenge that Oregon's defensive backs are savoring this week.
I described him as like a road to glory, like creative player, like that you just like you can set all the percentage, like all his qualities to like whatever the highest you can go. I mean, he's something made in the lab, man. It's insane. Along those lines, do you think Oregon needs to be more worried about Quinshon Judkins or Jeremiah Smith?
Man, I think that games like this are won through the run game. And Jeremiah Smith, obviously terrific player, great player. It's no knock on receivers, but whoever is able to establish the run in this game or stop the run in this game is going to have a huge leg up, right? Like controlling the pace, keeping the ball away from the other offense. I think the running backs and the offensive line play by both teams is going to be the key to this game, and staying ahead of the sticks, right? Not getting behind, not giving up sacks, so you get off balance on offense, or have one team. Oregon does not want to be in a game where Dylan Gabriel throws 50 passes. They want to be balanced. They want to be able to run the ball and establish the ball and maintain possession. And I imagine Ohio State's the same way. I don't think they want Will Howard throwing 50 passes in this game. They want to be able to run the ball down Oregon's throat and have Howard beat him over the top when it's there. So I think the run game is going to be really key for this game.
I will just a couple more minutes here, and I want to go next to just kind of a what if scenario, or a fill in the blank sort of scenario for you. Sure. Oregon will win this game if
Oregon will win this game if they win the turnover battle and critical downs. I think, when you look at any of these top 5 matchups, the teams that win the turnover battle, that don't give the ball away on the goal line, that get that key turnover, however it may be, get those extra possessions, have a huge leg up. And then it's going to be, I mean, this game's going to be decided by a few plays, a fourth down on the goal line. If a team's able to score a touchdown or get stopped, maybe even a 3rd and 5 from midfield right at the end of the half, or, those kind of downs are going to be the downs that decide this game. So I think that the turnover battle, those key downs, and then I think the run game are going to be the big 3 factors in this game.
Should the winner of this game go to number 1?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think, Bama just lost last week. It makes the most sense. It's jumping Texas. Bama still probably has, I don't know. Well, actually, I guess Vanderbilt now has the best one in the country, for being honest with ourselves.
I guess.
I guess I'd put Bama's win over Georgia as the second best win. But, Texas's win over Michigan, that was something. But now that looks a little bit not as good because Michigan just lost for a second time. I'd probably say that, this is the third. This becomes like the best win in the country, or second best win in the country behind Vanderbilt, like I said. Once this game goes final. So yeah, I agree with you, man. Well, hey, listen, he's Alec Dietz again. I didn't reset it at all during that conversation because I was just so locked in on everything he was saying. Alec Dietz, he does a great job covering the University of Oregon, the Oregon Ducks, for the Eugene Register Guard. Second time we've had him on, and you knocked it out of the park, man. I'm very much looking forward to this game. I wish I could say that I was coming out there to actually watch this one in person and see it live. A, because it's going to be awesome, but B, because I hear Austin Stadium is just incredible, an incredible environment, so it would have been a lot of fun. But I will be watching this one from home. So, but I hope we get a chance to reconnect and maybe, like you said, maybe Big Ten championship game, maybe
even after in the playoff. It's 2024 in football, so it's a wild world out there, that's for sure. But I'm excited. It's going to be packed. Obviously game day is going to be there, and they bring a whole different element to these atmospheres. And I know fans are really looking forward to the game this Saturday. The whole town's pretty much going to shut down, so it should be a heck of a game.
He's Alec Dietz again on Twitter at Alec Dietz. If you want to follow him and get the scoop on Oregon leading up to this one. Alec, can't thank you enough again, man. And like I said, I hope we get a chance to connect down the line. But we'll text or something at some point.
For sure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Always fun.
Absolutely. We'll be right back, guys. We'll recap everything Alec had to say, continue previewing this matchup on the other side. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back in, Sons of the Shoe. Spencer German with you. I love Alec. I do. He's great. I love having him on. He gives some great insight, and I thought he broke down this game pretty eloquently in terms of how things set up between these two teams that are oddly now in the same conference. It's still weird to sort of wrap our heads around the idea that Oregon and Ohio State are in the Big Ten together. But yeah, there's some interesting storylines to this that I want to dissect a little bit more with you guys as well. And I want to preview this game the same way that Nick and I previewed Ohio State, Iowa last week by kind of going through a couple different headers here and giving you some things to know, some fears we might have, whatnot. And then we'll talk a little more in depth about a couple other issues as well. But we started last week with the upset scale of this game. And obviously with it being the number 2 and number 3 teams now ranked in the country in the newest and latest AP poll, the chances of an upset are pretty high. Oregon's a good team. We know this. They haven't necessarily played their best football, I don't think, to date in a game. Like every game that I've kind of had a chance, the games I've had a chance to tune in for Oregon, and from just kind of reading up on them and understanding them, there has been some flaws. I think Alec really pointed out the fact that Dylan Gabriel's had his fair share of struggles, especially in the red zone of late. I mentioned the offensive line issues during the interview. That's been something for them. But like at any moment they can put it all together and they can beat any team in the country, I believe. if they go out and play their best football on any given Saturday. So that's something that's on my mind as I think about this game. Something that has me a little bit nervous about this game is that they are a very good team. They are at home. How much that matters. I think there's something crazy. I want to say they're like 38-1 at home in their last 39 games or something like that. 34-1 since 2018 at home. That's what this stat is. That is insane. Absolutely insane. So Austin's a tough place to play. You're going out on the West Coast. Like this has all the makings for an upset it wouldn't be a bad upset. It would be an upset that you can understand because it's a very, very good football team. But yeah, like you got to understand what you're getting into in this game. It's going to be your toughest test to date. And I do wonder about like the travel and stuff. I actually heard Noah Eagle, who's calling this game, he did an interview on 92.3 The Fan this week, and he talked about the travel plans of Big Ten teams going out to the West Coast and how those games have gone, kind of handling that. The one team that went west that traveled that won was Indiana, and they went out a day before kickoff on a Friday and basically like just let their body clock be kind of normal, and that's how they walked out with a victory. The other teams that have gone west, they've all gone an extra day earlier to let their bodies adjust, and it hasn't necessarily worked as well. So Ohio State is taking a page at Indiana's book and trying to do the same thing. So yeah, upset scale is high in this one for obvious reasons. Names to know. I think the first one that comes to mind, other than the obvious of Dylan Gabriel, is Tez Johnson. Their leading receiver, 31 catches, 395 yards, the 5 touchdowns. He's very, very good. I'm going to talk more about the wide receiver group for this team just in general because it is a loaded group. First time you're going to see a group that can kind of match Ohio State. I think, maybe not quite player to player because Jeremiah Smith's a freak and whatnot, but they have a really talented group of wide receivers that can certainly score and put up numbers and do their own thing in their own right. So Tez Johnson headlines that though. I want to also highlight Jordan Birch, who is one of their talented defensive ends on this team. He leads the team with 5 sacks, which is tied for 8th in college football. Pretty impressive mark for him so far. Mateo Uyunglele, who I believe was looking at Ohio State during his recruiting time out of high school, but ended up choosing Oregon. Obviously, the brother of DJ Uyunglele, who is not having a very good time at Florida State at the moment. But Mateo has 3.5 sacks, and he's done some nice things for this team as well in terms of being able to rush the passer. He rotates in. He is not considered like a starter on their team at this point, but when he comes out in the field, he's somebody that you have to account for, somebody that is going to make plays, and certainly a threat to do some things up in the trenches and mess up a game if you let him. So another guy to pay attention to. I'm really highlighting the trenches with this, but also Derek Harmon. They're one of their talented defensive linemen, interior guys. He's got 19 total tackles this year, 3 sacks, and he is obviously a force up front as well. And another guy that again makes this Oregon defensive line and defensive front, as Alec obviously alluded to as well with that group, very, very good and a challenge for Ohio State. And we'll talk about it more with the offensive line, but like the offensive line in this game is in for their toughest test. And we've been kind of waiting to see if they've looked better than last year, but is it fool's gold? This is going to be the game where I think we find that out. But those are some of the names to know, other than the obvious of Dylan Gabriel, who's under center for them. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the wide receivers as well. Jordan James is their top running back, and he's done some nice things this year. 552 yards, 5 touchdowns, but they do spread the wealth a little bit. And obviously Dylan Gabriel can run a little bit as well. And that's, I think, the other thing. Gabriel and his ability to use his legs, something Alec alluded to, like he's been doing it a little bit more the last couple of weeks, but this playbook is going to be opened up. Like they're not holding anything back for this one. Ohio State's probably doing the same sort of gamesmanship with Oregon, obviously, and utilizing Will Howard in a different way, and maybe saving some stuff for this one, just in terms of scheme or plays that they really like. But yeah, like I do worry a little bit about Dylan Gabriel being able to run the football as well and impact the game in that way. Key matchup. The key matchup for me, and this is where I get into the entire wide receiver group for Oregon, is their wide receiver group against Ohio State's secondary. They're going to want to throw the football. Oregon is having some good success pushing the football down the field to this point this year, and being able to sort of maximize their passing game for Gabriel. He's completing 78% of his passes. He has a really, really talented group. Tez Johnson out of the slot, Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden outside on the edges. All those guys, like I said, it's a trio that I think can probably comes pretty close, at least, to matching the trio that Ohio State has on their offensive side of things as a receiver group with Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, and Emeka Ibuka. And Stewart's really good to transfer into this team. Tez Johnson back from last year, a senior who's very, very good as well. Like this wide receiver group is solid. They generally like to rely on Gabriel to throw the football. And so being able to guard these guys and not give up big chunk plays, because we've seen this defense at times, not maybe this year as much, but in previous seasons, like there were some teams that had some good receivers and they made some plays downfield. They call themselves the best in America. That secondary does, with just the upperclassmen laden group that they have out there on the field, sort of leading the charge and doing what they do week in, week out. Caleb Downs is part of that, of course. Denzel Burke is obviously part of that group as well. Lathan Ransom, who I thought had a really good game against Iowa last week. They have a group that is talking the talk. Can they walk the walk and shut down maybe not shut down because they're going to make some plays, but limit and keep from doing too much damage this talented Oregon wide receiver group. That is the matchup I think I'm most intrigued by going into this one. Educated Wish, which is really just our way of fancifully saying that the thing that we want to see the most, like the thing that we're most kind of keyed in on, that we want to see the takeaway that we want to have from this game when it's all said and done. Obviously, you want to see Ohio State win. That much it goes without saying. But for me, and it goes back to the trenches, Ohio State's, you know what? It's not even just one side. Ohio State winning the trenches on both sides of the football. I think this season, at times, Ohio State's defensive line has been more of like a finesse defensive line where they can get some pressure, they can do that, but they're not necessarily great against stopping the run. Can they flip the script on that? Can they dominate in the trenches on that side of the ball, make life difficult for Dylan Gabriel, stop the run, stop him as a runner at the quarterback position, and make those types of plays to set yourself up to get the ball back to the offense in longer third down situations that put stress on Oregon's offense. On the flip side of that, I think, are hopeful that this offensive line group for Ohio State is better than previous years. I think there's evidence of that. But this is the big stage now. This is the stage you got to do it on. A game against Oregon where the lights are bright and you got a team that has a good defensive line in their own right. I just rattled off some of the names from Jordan Birch to just obviously Uyunglele, to Derek Harmon, their defensive tackle. Like, they have a group up front that is going to be a challenge and a force for you. How do you handle it? How does this group handle it? Can they win in the trenches? We always bring up that the team that wins in the trenches in the Michigan game tends to win the Michigan game. At least that's what history tells us about the matchup with Michigan. And I think the path towards that starts in a game like this, where you're going to have a tougher test and it's on a big stage against a ranked opponent that's highly ranked like you. What are you going to do? So I want to walk away from this game feeling like the offensive line can win against other comparable teams in the Big Ten, but in college football, and prove that they have that toughness and that physicality up front on the on both sides, but especially on the offensive line, because I think we still are waiting to see them do it on a game of this magnitude and a game of this scale. the odds. Our friends at FanDuel, as we like to do in this segment, have the Ohio State Buckeyes, your Ohio State Buckeyes, favored by 3.5 in this game going on the road to Oregon. That's something, like I said, because of Oregon's record at home, they do not lose at home since 2018, 34-1. It's a tough place to play, but Ohio State is favored by 3.5 in this contest. It's going to be an interesting matchup, and I think Ohio State wins. I don't know if I think they cover. I could see them winning on a field goal. I really could, but I hope that they. I think Ohio State's the more talented team, and in an ideal world, if we got an Ohio State team that sort of separated itself late, pulled away late to win this game, that would be like the most satisfying thing to go along with what I said about like winning in the trenches and just feeling like they put themselves kind of a step above of another good team around the country. That'd be huge. All right, guys, we take a break. When we get back, a couple things to get to. Ryan Day or Dan Lanning, we kind of asked this question, a variation of this question to Alec, just about how much this game would mean for Dan Lanning, who's still kind of looking for that signature win. Does it mean more for him or does it mean more for Ryan Day? We'll talk about that. Also, some comments that you don't want to hear from a member of this Ohio State offensive line when he's about to step into the Thunderdome. That is Autzen Stadium. We'll get you that coming up next here on Sons of the Shoe. Welcome back in, guys. Final segment of the show this week. We're not going to do the traditional 4-down territory this time because I have a couple topics that I want to get to that I think are worthy of discussion. And because we had the guests, it kind of changed the way we did the show this week. But it's still some important things to get to here. And I want to pose the question to you guys, which you can jump in the comments section at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel. You can hit me up on Twitter at Spencito_. Who needs this game more, Dan Lanning or Ryan Day? And I think it's an interesting discussion because, like I brought up with Alec, Dan Lanning is still kind of waiting for that signature win during his tenure at Oregon. He committed to them this offseason, didn't take the Alabama job that was kind of being floated or thrown his way. He stayed there. He was loyal. He wants to build something there. I think that's admirable and that's great. But all his biggest games are against Washington the last couple of years, and he's lost all of them. He's lost to Washington on the biggest stage each and every single time. So I do think there's a valid case to be made that Dan Lanning needs this win maybe more than Ryan Day does. But here's why I think it's Ryan Day. Ryan Day, as we know, is looked at maybe more so than any other coach in college football this year in a microscope of all microscopes. Like everything he does is over hyper analyzed because Ohio State fans, as we all know, are relentless in their pursuit of like perfection and greatness. And the moment he slips up, people are ready to pounce and run him out of town. So a win over Oregon is a statement for him. It is something that kind of affirms like, hey, I'm still here doing this damn thing. I'm still the right coach for this job. I'm still going to be able to help Ohio State dominate this new look Big Ten. And it sort of stabilizes, I think, the footing for him of his job security, at least until he gets to the Michigan game. And then we can kind of go from there because we know that's going to be the next big there's going to be other moments that are over and hyper analyzed, but we know that that's the big one that everyone's waiting for. He has to win that game this year in order to know he's totally safe going into another season next year. But I do think like that's the biggest thing because Dan Lanning, like, yes, is he still looking for that signature win? Yes, of course he is. He needs to still sort of prove his worth in this college football landscape and basically be able to go out there and get on the level of some of the great coaches in college football at this point, because he's not. I think he's trending in that direction. He is obviously trending in the direction of being a guy who is going to be one of the best in this sport for a long period of time, especially if he keeps recruiting the way he's recruiting. Excuse me, but if he loses this game on Saturday, I don't think anyone's looking at him and being like, "Oh, Dan Lanning, got to run him out of town. He just doesn't have it in these big games. Like, he still have to win that big one, but he'll still have time to do that. I just feel there's not as much pressure on him to get that done at this point when he's got he's gonna he I maybe I'm just misperceiving or not perceiving the pressures of being at Oregon as a national brand out on the West Coast as much as I understand what that's like here at Ohio State. But and so maybe I'm wrong on this, but it doesn't feel like from a national level he has the pressure on him that Ryan Day does to that extent. And so again, for that reason, I just think it means more for Ryan Day because everything he does is so hyper analyzed and everything that he does matters in terms of his job security. And it's going to get criticized. And if you lose to Oregon, it becomes, well, what does that mean for Michigan? Are you going to lose to that team too? You can't even win in the Big Ten with this super team. It's going to be all this questioning as you continue to navigate a tough schedule ahead because you got Nebraska after a bye week. You got Penn State coming up. Obviously, we know about the game. So, like, I just think, like, if you win this one, it's a goodwill and it goes a long way this season in making it feel like, okay, this is a championship caliber team for real. You still got to do it against Michigan, but it starts to get people staying on his side and not feeling like the pressure's on the rest of the way and that he absolutely has to like win out or has to absolutely win the national championship. This one would go a long way for him. I really think it would. So I think the answer is Ryan Day. But do you agree? Do you think Dan Lanning or Ryan Day needs this win more on Saturday? Let me know your thoughts at Spencito_ or in the 92 to the Fan YouTube comment section. Last thing, guys, and I thought this was interesting. This video comes from Dylan Davis, who is a beat writer covering the Ohio State Buckeyes. And this was Josh Fryer this week at practice. Obviously, Josh Fryer is the starting right tackle for the Ohio State Buckeyes. He's had some ups and downs to start the season. And this was his interesting commentary on how he feels about playing games in primetime with the bright lights on the big stage.
I'm not a big, I don't like it on national television because if you get messed up, everybody knows, the reporters, the announcers, everybody. But at the same time, you got to embrace it too. I think last year, personally, when it was a big game, I would kind of shy away from it. But now I feel more experienced and just ready to play the game. And it's a cool environment because you never get to experience anything like this ever again in your life. So
when it's a bit okay, when we already have questions about the offensive line and we already doubt if they're going to be able to win some of the bigger matchups they have this season, like this game against Oregon this weekend, because we still don't know for sure if they're this tough group up front and they can win that way. Don't tell us you don't like the bright lights, Josh Fryer. Don't admit to us that you don't necessarily like it and that last year you shied away in those moments, but now you're more experienced, so you got it all figured out. Just lie to us. Just lie to us and say, yeah, you know what? I'm not thinking about what the media is going to say about me after the game. Telling us that's on your mind is not going to make us feel better. Like that just makes us worry that you're going out there and playing this game with this fear of like, well, if I mess up, no, that can't be the case. I do not want to hear that from my linemen. If this isn't just an Ohio State thing, I don't care if I was a Michigan fan, which sounds like the worst experience I could ever live in my lifetime as a sports fan. But if I was a Michigan fan, I would not want my linemen admitting that they get a little on edge and they pucker up a little bit when they play primetime games on national TV because they know they're going to be hyper criticized and they know everyone's watching. And if you mess up, it's a problem. And that in previous years, he struggled with that. Don't want to hear it. I don't. It does. Like I was feeling good about this game. I picked Ohio State to win, and playing that clip reminded me about why I still have some nerves about this team going into for a big assignment like this, even though I go down the box and I check like everything, like advantage Ohio State. I'm like, okay, I think they have the better running back. I think they have the better skill position players. I think they have the better defense. I think they have the better of the two quarterbacks potentially. Like I go down the list of things and check all these boxes, and I feel like Ohio State has the advantage. But then I'm reminded,
Oh, yeah, they're playing on the road in Autzen Stadium, which is a tough thing to do. Oh, and our offensive line is apparently scared now to go into an environment like that. Not great. Not great. But hopefully Josh Fryer is right in that he's a year older and he's got a little bit more experience, and so it won't be a too big for the bright lights or the lights are too bright situation here, and he's going to show up and he's going to play well because I need them to play well in the trenches to prove to me that, like, not only are they going to beat Oregon, but that they are a national championship caliber team, because I think the best teams that generally win the championship are exactly that. They win in the trenches. Please, Josh Fryer, don't tell us these things moving forward. Just go out and play good football. That's all we ask, because you've had some ups and downs already, and now you got me feeling nervous. All right, guys, appreciate you stopping by. I apologize for Nick's tardiness on this episode. He apologizes for his tardiness on this episode, but I did think Alec was great, and he knocked out a great first segment of the show. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe to Sons of the Shoe, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify. Where else do you get podcasts around here? Odyssey app. Oh yeah, that thing that employs us. The Odyssey app. Did I mention Apple? You can also follow along at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel, where we post all the video sections of the show. And as always, we appreciate your support. So like, follow, subscribe, and do what you can to support us here at Sons of the Shoe. Guys, thank you so much. And emphatically, because we need this one, it's a big game, biggest of the year. Go Bucks.